Aloha everyone, I want to share with you a little bit about the POSCA Paint Pens in your Welzie art box. So these are my favorite pens and they're so much fun to work on. But there's a couple of tricks and tips that I recommend before you get started. That way you don't totally destroy your piece like I've done plenty of times in the past. All right, so let's get started. Tip number one, shaking up. This is very important. If your pens have been sitting a while, you want to get that ink and everything inside it nice and mixed up, so when you load up your pen, it's good to go from the start. So do at least a minute of some good shaking. So you got your shaken up pen, and tip number two is loading up your ink. So what you're going to do is take the cap off and just lightly start pressing the tip of your pen down. What you're going to do is you're going to feel that pen resist back into the cap. You're going to want to press firmly down and slowly kind of pump the ink from the pen into the tip. As you kind of firmly tap down on your pen, you're going to see the ink slowly drain out through the tip. And once that tip is nice and full and you can get a smooth, consistent line full with the paint, you're ready to go. Remember, when you're loading up the fine tip paint pens, you want to be real delicate of how hard you press down. Not very much at all. A little too much and it's going to drain out some ink. And you don't want to do that because you want these to last as long as possible. Tip number three is rendering colors. Now there's a ton of different techniques you can use to just render two colors, but I'm going to show you a basic wet into wet rendering technique. What you're wanting to do is start with your lightest color. Say you want to render green and yellow. What I'm going to do is lay down the lighter color down first, and then I come back with the darker color, and you're going to see how it gives you that middle gradient in between the two colors. So here with the dry on dry technique, I already have my first color down, and I'm just going to come back over it with my next color. Now it's nice and dry, so I won't get any of that paint pulled up into the following color, and I can use different line techniques to help blend your eyes to see that color transition. Tip number four is layering colors. Now I do quite a few layers in my pieces. As you can see, when I go through the process, it's layer on layer on layer, each layer fixing the previous layer. So when you're layering colors, you really want to have them dry. That is the most important thing. Too much ink in one spot, you can bleed it out with your other pens, and you just don't want to do that. What ends up happening, you can get paint all over your piece if you overwork a wet piece of artwork. So just be really careful, let stuff dry. A blow dryer works great, and just don't go too fast with this. It dries really quickly anyway, so just be patient. Tip number five, spills. They happen all the time, so as long as you know what to do, you're going to be okay. Just don't worry. So when too much ink gets out of the tip of your pen, you're going to find a little puddle on your piece. Now if you're doing a big fill area, that puddle can just kind of be spread out and you won't really notice it too much. You're going to be kind of stoked. You're going to use that ink anyways. Now if it's an area, in a fine area where you don't want a puddle of ink, the best thing to do is get a paper towel or some toilet paper, some of this real soft paper that likes to absorb water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rip off a piece, and you see how it's nice and frizzy there? I'm going to use that to absorb all the paint. You're going to get a little paint there, but at least it's going to dry in a reasonable amount of time, and you can scrape it off with your razor blade. I'll show you how to do that later, and erase it. So it's not that big of a deal. The paper towel works great. All right, tip number six is filling in large areas. I like to work from one end to the other. That way my pen is always in the wet ink. I don't have to worry about the dry ink getting caught up into my paint pen and me having to clean the tip every few seconds. So instead of just scribbling all around and making a bunch of noodles, work from one end to the other, keep the tip nice and wet, and you can just fill in your whole piece. By the time you get to the one end, the other end will already be dry. So that's the way to fill in those large areas with your medium tip POSCA paint pen. Save your fine ones for the details. All right, tip number seven is cleaning the tips. Now, if you get some dried paint pen in there, you get another color, you're gonna wanna clean your tip. What I do is I just use the back of my hand and do a couple dashes like that. The oils from the skin really pull the unwanted material or ink off of the pen. If you don't wanna do it on your hand like this, that's fine. You just go over your sketchbook, you can use the cover, you can use the back, and you just kind of do a few dabs. Use the ink in the paint pen to work out the unwanted colors and materials. But really the hand works the best, and these are non-toxic, so you don't have to worry too much. Tip number 8 with the POSCA pens is using a consistent, steady pressure. Now if you're doing some short, quick lines, you don't really have to worry too much because there's going to be enough ink in the tip of your pen. But you know, if you want to do a long line or a big fill area, you want to keep some steady pressure. You can practice feeling the different pressures in your pen by just seeing how far the tip can go back up into the pen. And about halfway down is the best pressure for doing large areas or doing long consistent lines. If you don't apply the pressure, what's going to happen is the ink that's in the tip of your pen is going to get used up. The pressure is what brings the ink from this part of the pen into the tip. So just make sure you have a nice steady pressure as you do those long smooth lines. Tip number 9 is erasing. Now this is a little sketchy. I use a flat tip razor blade to scratch off my artwork. It sounds really bad. It's like nails on a chalkboard. So it's a really easy way to clear the room and work with peace and quiet because no one will want to be in with you when you're erasing. You can hear that noise, right? That means it's working. Now I don't want to do too much erasing because I do scratch the piece, and the more scratches I have, the less smooth my lines are going to come out. I'm holding the razor blade nice and flat and just going over the unwanted area. The better you get at it too, the less scratches you put into your piece. So as long as you're not doing deep gouges, you can erase a few times. You don't have to worry. Now this little scrap stuff, you just blow it off, dust it to the side. That dust does have ink in it, so it can smear if you don't get it off your piece or you just leave it on your table. So just be careful what you do with that ink dust. All right, the last and final tip may seem a little silly, but it's capping your paint pens, pressing hard enough to hear that click. You want to make sure these are sealed up because the pens do dry out. The tips dry out if you don't seal them up correctly. And they'll last forever if you do this every time. I've had paint pens for years when I was a kid. So make sure you clip that, push that in nice and tight, and get that sealed up. Also with storing, if you store them this way, the paint's going to drain to the bottom and you don't have to shake it up extra hard to do it. Storing your pens in a horizontal fashion will definitely add to the longevity of your pens. What happens is the ink is going to be spread out through the piece, and when you start going to use it, it's ready to go. You don't have to mix it up as much. When you store it vertically, you'll hear the little ball inside. It'll be stuck down there in the paint pen, and sometimes you'll shake it and you won't even hear a noise. That's because everything hardened together. So store them horizontal if you can. It's no big deal if they're vertical. It might take a little bit of life out of it, but they'll last a long time, capping them and storing them horizontal. All right, so now you're an expert on using paint pens. Get started, get your stuff together, and let's make something. Thanks for watching, and make sure you click like and subscribe and do all that fun stuff. So grab your paint, grab your pens, get ready, let's go make something and get inspired.